That's right. Today we have Serenity here to talk about spell books. Serenity, you want to introduce yourself for people who may not know you in the scene, some of the newer faces?
What's up, guys? I'm Serenity. I've been playing for quite a long time. A lot of the older players know me. I was here when Spellbooks first came out, and I was one of the first pioneers.
There you go. Yeah, Spellbooks, it's a deck that's been out of the meta for a while, but it used to be one that absolutely dominated in its prime. Probably one of the most nerfed decks to ever exist in Duel Links. What brought your attention to Spellbooks when they originally released? Are you a TCG player or are you strictly Duel Links? What made you want to be like, oh yeah, Spellbooks, that's my deck?
Um, I wasn't really a TCG player. I played it kind of casually, but I did know a lot about Spellbooks. And when it first came out, I was kind of still like a newish player. Not really, but I wasn't very competitive. And I really kind of wanted to get in there, get into the scene. So I took a liking to Spellbooks, kind of knowing it was going to be good on release with all the cards.
Did you just like read over them and you're like, yeah, this is gonna be? Because I remember when the deck originally came out, people were
Well,
like,
I
it's
knew
just
what
too
they all did
slow.
already
Right.
because I knew it from the TCG. And, Spellbooks had like a reputation in the TCG for being like amazing during the Dragon Rule format. So I knew that would kind of translate into Duel Links. So I pretty much started theory crafting immediately. And, we worked out on a grass deck.
Okay, and that was like the first iteration of Spellbooks, right? They started off as like a grass deck, then they,
Hmm.
obviously with they started getting their cards hit. They started getting reset got hit as well, which made grass kind of unreliable. And of course, with the meta shifting as well, eventually, we it became what we all know as most people that are newer to the scene will know as the summer meta Spellbooks, which was dominated by Light and Dark, and then Light and Dark got shafted, and spell books have kind of been, um, relegated to cog-worthy rather than an actual tier deck. Is Spellbook still worthy running today? Is it worth investing in, or is it more of a it's just unplayable right now in its current state?
I would say no, it's not worth investing, sadly. The deck's been through a lot. It's most likely the most longest running meta deck, but right now it just can't keep up with anything because the core of the deck is Fate, and the entire deck is just to disrupt one play. But almost every single deck currently has more than one play, so it just wouldn't work.
Mhm. So is that pretty much why it used to work back in the day, or is there other reasons that made original spellbooks the tier one deck that they were? Was it just denying a single play back then it was so strong, or is there something else that was kind of taken away from them, or is just the meta just too fast and has evolved to a state where that single fate play is just no longer viable?
Well, when the deck first came out, it was more about being able to have an insane amount of advantage if you were to open grass or be able to pull off like a fool combo. And that worked against most of the meta, and it was pretty consistent because it was pre-nerf restart. But after restart was nerfed, the deck really just wasn't consistent, so we had to resort to playing Silent Magician variants with just Silent Magician and during that time, whenever Spellbooks was relevant, that's because the meta was really fragile in the sense that they would get destroyed by only one disruption.
Okay. So this you sent me a few screenshots of kind of all the deck lists and types that you wanted to talk about. So I'll kind of be throwing them up as we kind of progress through the stages of spell books. So you told me this was, if I'm not mistaken, you can double check on the screen. This is the original deck that you came up with when they first came out.
Yeah,
And this
this
is
was
this is one of those circus decks back with this is what circus always talks about, three econ back in the day. You had to play three econ and everything, or just not a worthwhile deck. So yeah, tell us a little bit about the original spell books.
well, this is like the first time, very surface level, I looked at spellbooks, and I just honestly I bought all the cards and I just put everything into the deck. Three of everything. That's what you see,
Hmm.
like three crescent. You even see like two power. Like it's pretty troll, but it's really nostalgic to me because I remember this is when I really fell in love with spellbooks.
So what was so I guess kind of looking at this deck, the core strategy is basically getting your Prophecy Destroyers out and then just setting up Fates. Was that like what this deck basically did, and then you just had econ for ending games.
Yeah, pretty much. Honestly, you would use grass, you would special summon your destroyers, you would fade away your monsters, and you would OTK. It was fun for
Now
what it
I
was.
remember, yeah, because I remember when this deck first came out. Kind of this is pretty much how it was originally played. It was with Prophecy Destroyer. Some people use the revive card to bring the that dark one back and stuff like that. Um, Initially, the very first kind of like with your deck list and kind of the first week of tournaments, because if I'm mistaken, correct me, but I believe when Spellbooks first came out, they didn't see much competitive success because people were still kind of messing around with the deck list, right?
Right. It didn't see like immediate CSX, but because surprisingly, this deck actually took a while to figure out.
Right. So kind of from the first couple of decks that came out, what was kind of the first one that really started to catch on? Was it a version like this? Was it a version with the revive, a version without grass? What was like that first initial version that was like, okay, I think we can win a tournament with this?
Well, the first one was actually kept secret until I had the second screenshot in our DMs. Luller won DLL number 7 with a Fool variant of the deck. And Fool was talked about, but it wasn't talked about enough to the point where people weren't really catching on until this won the deck.
All right, so what about Fool was just like that made the deck really pop off and made it like meta?
Fool was just an insane card if you pulled it off by itself. Because Fool is a +4 if you just get it off by itself. Because you tribute itself and then you special summon Reaper, which searches out a spellbook card from your deck and special summons another prophecy from your deck as well. Which is actually a +3, but when you play DMOC, it becomes a +4 because DMOC also gets its own search from the graveyard.
And I see here he plays Grit instead of that restart. Was that optimal, you think, or did this deck still also become kind of a restart deck?
This deck definitely became a restart deck. I think Grit was just early thinking because
Mm.
this was pre-nerf Grit when Grit was like really stupid with like all the chants and everything,
Oh yeah, it was
and
just
it
like
was just
random
really,
proc.
really good because there was a lot of mass hero in the meta at the time, and we
Mm.
needed a way to not die to Anki.
Right, right, right. So this is where it got its first initial like, all right, guys, this is a good deck. Trust. Um, it started placing high. It started winning stuff. And then, if I'm not mistaken, the restart nerf happened.
Yeah, pretty much. Like Grassbooks was really dominant during this period of time until the restart nerf came out, and this is probably the first and only time that Spellbooks was a true tier 1 deck.
Okay, so you don't think they were ever really, besides this, they were never like a tier one. Were
I
they more
mean,
like at that tier two status? Like, what do you mean by that?
it's really debatable, but like officially on the DLM, this is the only time that Spellbooks was ever put on the tier 1 status.
Okay, okay, okay. I see, I see. So, in your personal opinion, was this the only time that it was actually a tier one deck, or do you think this deck was actually underrated almost just because people, because from my experiences, this deck was considered a little bit harder to play, especially back in the day when the cards weren't as limited and there weren't. It wasn't just a linear one style play style. Do you think it was just one of those decks where it seemed weaker than it actually was because of the player base, or was it actually just never that tier one status again?
I think there was another time when Spellbooks was tier 1 during the summer of 2019 when Light and Dark came out, and it was a very dominant. Yet it stayed in tier 2 status just because it didn't have enough representation. Because only a certain um like handful of players would play Spellbooks to success. And like actually, it was always if you ever see Spellbook list, you will always kind of see the same names pop up over and over again because only those certain people would play Spellbooks.
Yeah, so let's talk about that because that was the kind of the most recent, most successful version of Spellbooks, the Light and Dark. When Light and Dark first came out, people kind of looked at it and said, "Oh, okay, that would kind of be fun for like a little fun little meme deck." But then when people realized you get to choose whatever card you wanted to add, they were like, "Holy crap, this is actually really, really disgusting." I think one of the first Light and Dark decks we saw was Silent Swordsman, which then didn't. It wasn't long before people started thinking, oh, wait, we can do this with Silent Magician as well. Um, Now, were you one of the first people to use Light and Dark? Is that correct?
Yeah, I remember the first Meta Weekly after Light and Dark came out. I had I had gotten like six of the best spellbook players in a private Discord DM, and we all just shared our deck ideas and played the same thing in the Meta Weekly. And in that Meta Weekly, I got second place with Light and Dark spellbooks.
Okay, so were there more than just? It was just more than just you playing this version of the deck, basically, or did they
Yeah,
all kind of tech in different things?
they all kind of teched in different things, but at the core, it was all kind of the same deck.
Okay, so what was when you were kind of building that kind of Light and Dark variant? What kind of things were going through your mind? Because there's a lot of stuff that you don't see as often these days. Well, I guess kind of before Light and Dark. I say these days at the end of Light and Dark's kind of session. There's the magical something, which we rarely saw anymore. The banished dude, I forget his name all the time, but he was only really used like based on the meta, right? Like if there was a heavy banish meta and in mirrors, you'd see him all the time. But other than that, a lot of people just kind of went into other things. No.
Yeah, for the most part.
Okay, okay. So Light and Dark, what did it give the Spellbook deck? Because it was on a decline at this point. What gave it that boost that it needed to? Was it just the consistency? Was Silent Magician that good and that crucial for the deck, or pretty much what? Because after it got nerfed, the deck was just gone, right? So what did Light and Dark give that we just don't have anymore that you can't fit in with cards to make it good again?
It was just the consistency. Like, there's a huge difference between being able to open Silent Magician 50% of the time and 80% of the time. And Light and Dark really shot up that consistency to the point where being able to consistently put up a Silent Magician and a Fate turn one was just incredibly oppressive against almost every other meta deck, where it would almost be auto win.
Is this would this be true in like a today meta? Like if we were able to set like a silent magician or make a silent magician and a set of fate, would it still be like a tier deck? Because I remember spell books were still around right at the beginning of the Dark Lord era, and right around the Dark Lord era. Yeah, pretty much with the beatdown nerfs, right? Correct, right? It was, but beatdown nerfs was also light and dark nerfs. So that first initial wave of Dark Lords, spell books were almost considered a counter. If they just get like a good hand, they would just stop any original play from the Dark Lords. So do you think now, like with Dark Lords in their nerf state, Invoke being a thing, Shiranui, Dark Magician, all these decks, would spell books be all right if they just had Light and Dark, or is that just not enough anymore?
I think Spellbooks actually would be all right. Like, at the very minimum, a very easy cog worthy deck, and maybe even tier three. But it could be. It's very dependent on like how the meta shifts around spellbooks, because if spellbooks exist, then people are going to build their own spell in tournaments. So I think, but honestly, I think the deck is still strong enough if you're able to open Silent and Fate to go against like Invoked or Dark Lords or even like Dark Magician right now. But it would be still pretty hard because of decks like Black Wings and,
Okay.
not Silent Magician, Seal Tomb still being very relevant in the meta.
That's right, Seal Tomb. Now it's interesting because the Fate banishes its cost, correct? Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, so it wouldn't. I guess they would be able to preemptively Lancia you if you wanted, but outside of Seal Tomb, they can't really stop the Fate these days. Doesn't or we have a question? Doesn't Dark Magician do the whole Silent Magician plus Fate thing now?
I mean, it's kind of different because how chain links work, but you know, it could be compared to that, except for the fact that circle targets and Fate doesn't target, which is a really huge advantage that Fate has over just targeting banishing,
That's right.
because
Fate does
your
not target.
opponent pretty much cannot exactly respond to a Fate, because you could just change what you're gonna do like as the Fate's going through.
There you go. So kind of so the two metas that this deck in your opinion were tier one was the original grass and then the 2019 summer meta. In that 2019 summer meta, what decks would you put this in against? Like what was it very powerful against, and what decks did you kind of want to avoid? Because I think that's when a majority of the current community came in, kind of at the beginning of 2019.
Right. Um, so some of the decks that you really wanted to play this against was Red Eyes. Silent Magician in the summer of 2019, and Fate just completely destroyed Red Eyes. They had like no actual way to get over Silent Magician, so you really wanted to play that as a counter deck. And it also had a pretty decent matchup against Neos at the time.
Against Neos? Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, like the this like Sazank Neos variant with the
Oh, okay,
Space
okay.
Marines.
Gotcha. Just from the banish effect and then I guess negating the Neos itself.
Yeah, it was a pretty 50-50 matchup though, but you could play it now.
Okay. So yeah, the Red Eyes specifically, as Red Eyes was like a guaranteed tier one deck for a lot of people. Um, just tossing the spell books into them, I could see that being very good. Pancake says Slash beats this. Well, Slash can't negate the fate, right? So what can it realistically do?
I
I
think
guess
slash. Wait, slash. What is slash? I'm thinking.
assuming Red Eyes
I
Slash
thought you
Dragon.
said clash. Red Eye slash dragon. What slash can't do is get over Silent Magician level 8. That's pretty much it. And also slash can't negate the fate too. Like it was
Mm.
just a very easy matchup because they really realistically couldn't do anything once you got out Silent Magician.
Yeah, that's right. They did take Spellbook of Eternity off of the ban list. Did that help Spellbooks at all, or is it just one of those factors of it's just too inconsistent? We need something like Light and Dark to boost that consistency.
I mean, in general, taking Eternity off the ban list does help the deck a little bit, but it doesn't help the consistency issues, so it just isn't good enough to play in the current meta.
What did it change? Just adding that Eternity in, like specifically.
Um, it allows you to pretty much have longevity more than just having one Eternity. Then you can play like two or three,
Mm,
and it also allows you to not play two masters. You can just stick to one master because master can kind of mess you up if you are in a top deck situation, and then you want to top deck that Eternity to get that Fate back, but you don't want to top deck that master to not be able to use it because you probably not a spellbook in hand.
okay. Um, we have a question. How was Spellbooks versus Ancient Gears? Because that was a weird matchup.
That was also a good matchup for spellbooks. It's been a while, so I kind of forgot about some of the decks that used to like be good at that time. But versus Ancient Gears, this is a deck that you wanted to put against Ancient Gears because usually you would be main decking Cyclones, and you would be able to just banish like Gear Town whenever it was put down. It was just very like disruptive against a deck that needs their core play to be done to win the game.
And then you said the Silent Magician Gear Town interaction. Did you mention that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it
Well, I
was.
mean, no, it actually Silent Magician, like no one would do it is what I'm trying to say. Like that would never really come up because they would just set the Gear Town.
Mm,
But it was really just Silent Magician wasn't the reason why spellbooks were good against Ancient Gears. It was really just because of the fates.
okay. So, so you're saying with Light and Dark back, this deck could have decent matchups in the current format. Which decks would you, if you were at let's say half power, right? We bring back Light and Dark. We keep Eternity where it is right now, and everything else stays the same. So Fate stays at 2. Um, what would you throw this deck into that would be a good counter match in like a clan war, team war format, or even if you're just going into like a best of 3 with a side deck? What would you ideally want to be matched up against, and what would you not want to see in the from the current meta decks?
You'd probably want to be matched up against Invoked or Dark Lords. I'd say like you would have closer to a 60-40% matchup if you're against those, if you're able to open the Silent Magician and the Fate consistently, you would be able to kind of like outlast them with the Silent Magician level 8, and it's really hard for them to kind of get over that monster. And what you definitely don't want to see is Black Wings. Black Wings probably would just destroy you because they place, like sealed tombs, and they would be able to just summon 3 monsters on turn 1 and just get over anything that you put up, as well as also having negates.
Okay, okay. Um, so then in that case, if we went full power spell books, like you could unnerf anything you wanted that, was like a spell book skill, like restart or light and dark or fate or anything like that. Where do you think this deck would just dominate? Or like, we spoke a little bit last week how if we were unbanning cards for like vampires, they'd still be meh. But then if you unban cards for like Six Samurai, they'd be tier one. What about spellbooks? Like, could we make them tier one if we just unbanned everything, or is it just nah? We need support at this juncture.
I don't think it's possible for this deck to be tier 1 if we were to get everything unbanned, but I think um, Spellbooks would turn from a rogue deck to like a real contender if we got Light and Dark back and we got Fate to. And why Fate to 3 is relevant is not because you have 3 Fates, but because now you can play stuff like TTH or really just TTH. Like
Right.
if Spellbooks currently had 2 TTH, it would be really beneficial against those Black Wings and those zombie matchups
Mhm.
where it's just like a bunch of synchros, you'd be able to disrupt them, and sealed tombs wouldn't be that much of a instant win than it already is.
Okay. So then what would we have to do to make them, like back in the meta, maybe tier 2, tier 1, but without completely, you know, blowing that deck up into tier 0 status? What would you out? Is there any additional skills you'd add, or is there TCG cards that you'd like to see in Duel Links? Have you ever thought of anything like that?
There's 2 TCG cards that realistically could come to Duel Links and would bring Spellbooks back to like a really strong uh, tier deck, and that would be Wisdom first.
Spellbook of Wisdom. All right. Target one spellcaster type monster on the field. Activate one of these effects. That face up monster is unaffected by other spell effects this turn, and that face up monster is unaffected by trap effects this turn. Quick play. Okay.
So this card is a really good protective card against any back row for your Silent Magician. It would be very beneficial for that. You would want to play like at least you would want to play one of these, and then it would be a pretty strong card to just set with your Silent Magician and your Fate, and there would be like almost no way to really get over that. This could be useful against things like Dark Magician, right? Where you can chain this to Circle's effect activating on your Silent Magician, and you would be able to protect your Silent Magician from dying.
Okay. And what was the other card that you were thinking?
And the other card that would really kind of bring Spellbooks back is Spellbook of, I think Knowledge is what it's called.
Book of No. Oh, this is the one that got leaked, but then ended up they were like, oh, whoops, wrong
Right.
card.
Yeah, Spellbook of Knowledge.
Okay. Send to the graveyard either one spellcaster monster you control or one other spellbook card from your hand or face up on the field, except Spellbook of Knowledge. And if you do draw 2 cards, you can only activate one Spellbook of Knowledge per turn. Okay.
So this card is just amazing because it gets to your other cards faster and it puts spellbooks in your graveyard. So you no longer have to play stuff like Organization or even Power to be able to use that Fate 3 on turn 1. And this simply just gives more consistency to the deck. You would be able to open Silent Magician more. You'd be able to find your traps more or your tech cards. It would really just bring spellbooks to having like a super consistent status where they can just have Silent Magician and Fate turn 1 every single time.
Okay, okay. So if you got both of these cards, would you say this deck would go to tier 1?
It's hard to say if a deck would go to tier 1 by just, like not having the knowledge of how people build around this deck,
Mm-hmm.
but I definitely think it would be at least tier 3 and
Mm-hmm.
possibly tier 2.
Okay, okay. Now, is that kind of the we talked a little bit about this last week as well. Is this kind of the mind the pun, the fate of spell books to kind of be always like the silent magician plus fate combo, or is there a future where spell books become something else? For example, vampires. I was talking with Shavs. He said essentially, as we get more and better cards, it's going to turn more into a zombie deck, less a vampire deck. Is that kind of what's going to happen with spellbook? Is it going to turn into a more spellcast oriented deck, more spellbooks, more less silent magician? Where do you kind of see Konami taking it if they decide to reinvest into this deck and actually give us good
So
stuff?
two things about that. There is a possibility where spellbooks can become an engine if we get Spellbook of Knowledge, where in the TCG, it was a very common engine where people would play two blue boys, one secrets, and one knowledge. And what that would do is it would essentially give you a pot of greed at the cost of your normal summon. Because you can normal summon your blue boy, search out secrets, use your secrets, search out Spellbook of Knowledge, and then use knowledge on your blue boy, and you would be able to draw two cards.
Okay. And you just kind
So
of go off of that. Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
yeah, and then you would be able to like do more combos. So that could be really good in decks that don't normal summon often. And it would just give them to pretty much a pot of greed, right?
Right.
At the cost of their normal summon, but if they don't use their normal summon already, it wouldn't matter. It would just be a pot of greed. And second, I think Spellbooks is always going to be at its core a Spellbook deck. I don't think it's ever going to be kind of two decks like a Spellcaster deck. I think it's always just going to be Spellbooks because the deck itself is just really large. Like there's so many cards you have to put in the Spellbook deck to make it a Spellbook deck, and it's really hard to just fit an entirely different archetype in there.
Yeah,
But
I'm reading some of these other cards. They are like Spellbook of Judgment. I can never see that coming to Duel Links.
no,
Holy
that will
crap.
obviously Soul Judgment would never come. It won't even come
Jesus.
back to the TCG ever. It's gonna be banned there pretty much forever. It's probably
Javin,
the best card that's ever been released.
jeez. Javin says, give us Priestess, FFS. Dark Lords have a ton of bosses, and we only have Silent. I'm assuming he's talking about High Priestess of Prophecy.
Yes.
What does she do? You can
Well, this is like
reveal three spellbook cards in your hand. Special summon this card from your hand. Once per turn, you can banish one spellbook card in your hand or graveyard. Target one card in the field, destroy that card. That's a pretty good effect.
right. I think if we got Priestess and we got stuff like Knowledge, we might be able to turn and like we might be able to move away from Silent variants and turn back to Grass variants if we're able to make it more consistent and have really nice boss monsters like High Priestess of Prophecy.
Okay. Was that kind of how spellbooks were played in the TCG? Like heavier, like there wasn't just 40 cards, they played more? Or was it always like they tried to cut it down? I don't know if you
No,
know
it
that.
was always 40 cards
Okay.
because basically the entire deck was summoning was just getting a spellbook of knowledge to grant you like a +7, right? And then you would just continuously work off that like immense card advantage against the meta decks where you would always be like you would always have that like very long longevity
Mm.
and you would be able to outlast your opponent.
Okay. Do you think so? Some of these kind of like other prophecy cards, I guess that's kind of where the spell books come in. I think isn't it like Alistair and Prophecy? They're the kind of like lore wise, they're what connect to spell books. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So between like the invoked cards and the prophecy cards, are there anything in those that you're kind of interested in seeing come to Duel Links?
I'm not totally sure because I don't have a lot of knowledge on those kind of cards, but I'm pretty sure it wouldn't really affect spellbooks much. It would more affect invoked.
Okay. What about kind of is there a world where we'd ever see synchro summoning come to spellbooks or XC summoning or anything like that, pendulum, any of those other mechanics, or is this strictly a more spell based archetype?
I'm pretty sure like spellbooks is more of like a very traditional, normal just having monster cards and having a very strong spell engine than having like all of the synchroing and exeasing. But you can always exease rank 6
Mhm.
with Reaper if you special summon Reaper and then you have the other special summon like Destroyer or something. So if there ever is a really good rank 6 exease to come out, then it could be possible that that's what Spellbooks would want to.
Okay, okay. Um, so kind of looking, I guess we can kind of we got off your little screenshots a little bit here. We can kind of push up. I think when people really started like getting tired, at least from what I remember, when Minato won MCS with Spellbooks, and then like every meta weekly and like for months straight, I feel like had Spellbooks topping or completely winning the whole thing. Do you think that was when they were at their height of their power? Or when do you think Spellbooks were just at their height of their power, undisputed, like best deck in Duel Links?
I think actually we have to go back for that. I don't think that the summer of 2019 was the best Spellbooks ever was.
Mhm.
I think the best Spellbooks ever was during MCS 9 with Mock Dragon's list.
Okay, pull that one up. Why do you think that one was the height of it? Is that what like caused the initial nerfs? It was just that was just too much.
I think honestly, just having a great player pilot an optimized deck, everyone kind of saw like how really great Spellbooks can be. And right after this, right after he got fourth place in MCS 9, he went off to win the World Championship qualifiers using Spellbooks.
Okay. Now this deck, looking at it, um, isn't even like that. Like it's just a three fate and the TTH, right? So you'd have to drop a TTH and a fate. This would still be a legal deck if the restart wasn't hit. And I feel like that's kind of been a common thing with spellbooks. Their skill gets hit and they die. It's like it's always a skill comes out that's really good and they get tiered really high, and then its skill gets nerfed and they just disappear. What is that? Is it literally just the consistency, or is it deeper than that? Is it they're missing a boss monster or they're missing key cards? Like what's going on?
I think it's literally just a consistency because I think at every point, Spellbooks has always been a strong deck, but it's not a consistent deck. So you can play Spellbooks and you can like summon your big boss monsters every like 50% of your duels, but that other 50% of your duels you're gonna open like Crescent, Power, Eternity Master, and you're just gonna lose because you don't have a playable hand.
Right. So if we had a universe where uh let's just say we only get knowledge and that's it, do you think that would be enough? Because that would boost the consistency a little bit. With the introduction of the three eternity, would that be enough to get you to tier three, or do you think both the cards you wanted, plus maybe the boss monster, so you guys can play grass, would that be more? Because I don't see a world where you guys can play grass without restart, or do you think it'd be worth playing restart if you just had other consistency cards like knowledge or something like that?
I think that could be a possibility, but itself, I think if knowledge came out by itself, I think it would bring spellbooks to tier three. It would definitely get a lot of spellbook players to be playing spellbooks again,
Right.
and just on its own, I really think having that core consistently can really help. And knowledge by itself doesn't just search. Like it's not a search card; it's a draw card, which in some cases can be better because you can draw your other trap cards to help you out with a lot of matchups.
Right, right. S- So are
And at
you
the very least, if that is not what brings it, what brings Spellbooks itself to tiered status, I think what I said before, Spellbooks being an engine with knowledge in any deck that can you give up their normal summon can be really good.
right? If I'm not mistaken, though, actually, I guess you can kind of give me your opinion on this. If they set Fate back to three, which essentially just lets you play your TTHs and your econs again, would that kind of help bump them? Obviously, those are all very powerful cards, especially TTH. Is that kind of something they would especially need, or should Konami only focus on boosting consistency for now? Because that anything else would just make them too strong.
I think if we just got Fate back to three, it wouldn't be enough because we still have a large consistency problem with the deck.
Okay.
Like this deck, I believe this deck is strong enough as it is. Like, even when Treacherous got hit, Spellbooks was still a meta deck because it could still go on its own with Treacherous. Treacherous just made it stronger.
Okay, okay. Zeko is in the chat. If I'm not mistaken, isn't Zeko the guy who lost to Stromberg and let them win? What the? Anyway, um, yeah. So look, so in a perfect scenario, it needs more support. So do you think Konami's kind of holding out on spellbooks a little bit because they have been relevant for so long? Because community perception of the deck is extremely slow and it's just not fun to play against, which is hilarious because now every deck is slow and there is no really fast decks anymore. Um, what do you think about that? Just kind of like that community perception of spell. Are they all just bad and don't know how to play Duel Links, or are they just hate whatever is popular?
No, I see the merit in disliking spellbooks over other meta decks. Just it's not fun to go against Silent Magician Fate turn one. You know, like you can't really play the game at that point.
But
Um,
it's fun to be the pilot of that, right? Like being in
oh,
the
very fun,
controllers,
very
yeah,
fun.
and just be like, no, you can't play
Yeah,
Duel
it's
Links, right?
incredibly fun.
I
But
mean,
you know, as only
50%
a
of players
small
are having fun in that situation.
right. It's
Uh,
just you know, like I don't think Konami wants to bring Spellbooks back for a while because I think they know that Spellbooks has been the most relevant deck of Duel Links history, and people just really dislike Spellbooks. You know, what's the point of bringing back a deck that's been here the entire time? You know, I feel like they kind of want to move on.
that makes sense. Also, Demon, thanks for the raid. I appreciate you. Love you, bud. I guess that makes sense because you know we always have a thing on the show where we talk about kind of Konami controlling their meta a little bit because they could essentially decide when a deck becomes tier one. You know that tomorrow they could wake up and just say, you know what, Spellbook of Knowledge, that sounds like a, or not Spellbook of Knowledge, Spellbook of Judgment, that sounds like a good card. Put it in Duel Links, and you know they could essentially ruin every other deck for a long time. Um, do you think it would be beneficial for Konami to invest into spell books, or would it be like, nah, it would just make them lose money if they didn't invest? Like, would it make people ideally the amount of spellbook players, would they invest into the deck, or would that just cause too many people to quit playing, or do you think more people would be inclined to play the deck with better support and kind of making it easier to play?
I mean, realistically, this deck has been out long enough where so many people have the deck that, you know, if they were to support the deck more, they wouldn't really essentially make more money
Okay,
because, you know, like a lot of people already have all the cards. You know, they're not going to go back into old boxes. But, you know, for
right.
the new players, it's a very hard question to answer. I don't think they necessarily make decks to make money, you know?
Okay. Do you think that actually, I forgot to ask you this. Is there any other spellcaster monsters that could be added to the game that would just like make this deck really, really good? Like any text or anything? Like kind of how Kyoko does the whole banish thing, can't banish. Is there any other spellcasters on your mind that would be like, oh crap, that'd be really good in a spell book or a grass deck even?
Sadly, I have no idea because I don't play TCG.
Okay, me either. So that's why I always ask people. Some people have the knowledge and they're like, oh yeah, bring this in, and then other people are like, I don't know, man. Just make my deck good, you know?
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. So you're in a perfect world, right? It doesn't have to be balanced or anything. What would you like to see happen to the spellbook deck kind of moving forward? What would make it the most fun for you to play?
Uh, I think I would want Knowledge and Priestess. I think that would bring back Grass Books, which is probably the most fun I've ever had with spell books, and it would really bring back the nostalgia. I think it
Okay.
would make the deck pretty well, and also balance, you know, because I'm not gonna say, hey, let's bring Judgment and you know make this deck tier zero while everything else is like, you
Right.
know, everything else is unplayable.
Right. Do you still consistently play this deck at all, or have you kind of left it on the side to play other decks while you just kind of leave it there? Do you still kind of hit cog with it, or not really?
Sometimes I do come back to this deck just because it's really fun. Like over the years, even when the deck has been bad, I've always tried to play grass books in like smaller tournaments or even in like the ladder, just because it was a lot of fun to me. Or sometimes I would try to bring back spell books, even if like the smallest things happen, like when Eternity got off the ban list.
Hmm.
Like I was trying to like hype it up, even though like secretly I knew it wasn't really gonna mean anything. But I try to hype it up. I try to be like, oh my god, we could play this against Dark Lords. We could beat Dark Lords and stuff. But
Your mind was
it,
like, nah, but your heart was like, hell yeah, let's go.
yeah, exactly.
Okay. So what would like a current day spellbook deck like if someone maybe not they don't want to be competitive but they're just trying to hit King of Games with a deck. First of all, do you think it's a good deck to hit King of Games with, or is it just too stressful to do? And then, second, like what would that deck look like?
I think it's not a good deck to really try to hit King of Games with if you're, like especially if you're a new player. Uh, like it's honestly not an easy deck, especially in the ladder, because in the ladder it's completely you don't know what's gonna happen really.
Right.
Like there's no actual meta there, so like people can be playing like completely random cards you never heard of, and that's not a good thing for spellbooks
Mm.
because the best part about spellbooks is knowing exactly what your opponent is playing and knowing exactly when to disrupt your opponent.
Okay, okay. So what would like if you did have to go in, like if someone was like, all right, I'm gonna challenge myself, I'm gonna get spell books to King of Games worthy, what would like be the deck list that they would play?
I think they would be playing 20 card silent books with a skill like switcheroo or like post nerf light and dark even with like cyclones.
Which do you think is better, the switcheroo or the light and dark?
I think light and dark probably is still better. It allows you to have those other monsters like Kaiku. Kaiku is like really, really good in the meta right now. Just like nothing can really play except for Dark Magician, which we really haven't seen yet. But preventing banishing from graveyard from stuff like invoked, like it's a really strong card,
Okay.
and as well as also just kind of trying to bring that back the consistency. You
Hmm.
do have to use like a cyclone, or you do have to lose 1,000 life points normally, but you would be able to still search out that silent magician that you need or that kaiku that you need,
Right, right,
and
right.
you can work off of there.
Okay. Kind of a little bit of a side note. Have you ever, when you looked at the silent, like light and dark skill, when you saw it, did you think that was too strong, or did you actually think it was balanced for Duel Links?
I thought it was too strong for sure.
Okay.
As a whole, so many decks use that skill.
Yeah. One of my
Like it
favorite
was actually
deck.
kind of crazy.
One of
Yeah, I
my
know. It
yeah.
was actually
One of my favorites was the I don't know if you ever saw it was the Silent Swordsman Parshath build. Oh my god,
yeah,
I will
yeah. I've
always
seen it.
love that deck. And then it
Right.
just died right away. And I was like, all right, that's nice, that's cool.
I think Light and Dark made too many decks that were inconsistent, too consistent, to the
Mm,
point where those decks would be able to dominate because they already had the power,
right,
but they just didn't have the consistency,
right, right,
like
right,
Spellbooks. But I knew kind of from the get go that this would be too strong,
right.
and like as it shows, it was too strong with like Spellbooks being able to dominate the entire
Mm.
summer.
Now, is there a version of Grass Spellbooks that's relevant right now in the meta, or do you just play the Light and Dark version and the Switcheroo version?
Uh, Not really, honestly. Like I'll play it because I miss it, I like it, but like it still very heavily relies on having grass in your hand. Like almost every grass deck that it's just not consistent enough to be able to win consistently with.
So what you're saying is you do have a Grass build.
I mean, yeah, I guess I do.
All right,
It's
boys.
very similar to the ones that we used to play, just like different texts and stuff.
Oh, really? Okay. All right.
Yeah, not
Well,
not really much has changed. I've tried like some spicy lists, but really in the end, like the original one works.